And we're finally live with our 178th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody! Welcome to another episode. I know we're running a little late. Ken and I were catching up. The last couple of weeks have been really busy and stressful for both of us. So wasn't meant to be a slight on anyone. We did post and say we were going live, and then got on camera, and it's the first time we've caught up in a while. So yeah, sorry about that. But otherwise, right, I do have a new set of swag that's going out here in the next couple of days. If you would like a t-shirt or stickers or any Absolute AppSec swag, join us on Slack and hit me up. Just DM me on Slack and send me a physical address, and we'll get you a t-shirt and other stuff for listening. So appreciate everybody's support there. Otherwise, DEF CON trainings are coming up. There are still a couple of seats available for that training. It's the 2 days after DEF CON in Vegas. I think it's like the 14th and 15th or 15th and 16th of August. Ken and I will be there. If you are looking for an open, secure code review course, please consider us. Outside of that, we are making plans for the fall. If you know of conferences that have open CFTs, or you would like us to come to your area, again, jump in Slack or DM us on Twitter. Let us know. And we're definitely open to traveling and doing it in person. We love teaching this stuff. Obviously, that's why we're doing it. Outside of that, Ken, do you have any conferences or anything like that are on your radar for the fall, like after DEF CON, after this summer series that is in Vegas? Is there anything else that you are looking at?
No, but I do want people to be aware, not for me, but LastCon's coming up. So I did want to let people know LastCon is, I think their call for papers or call for training I don't know if it's been closed, but I think it might be, because I saw something about last time to submit for it, a few days ago. But anyways, the point is that LastCon's coming up. That's a good one. It's in Austin, Texas, and I would recommend it. It's also, you get great barbecue and great food every time I go out there. It's it's amazing food. You were out there. You went to the same because that one we did, I forget what it's called, DevSecCon or something like that. That's in the Chuck Norris Center, and that's the same place that LastCon's held. And the reason I say that is you saw the configuration, how to get to any of those rooms, you have to go through the main lobby congregating area. So it makes, I guess what I'm saying is that's one of the, to me, given the size of the venue and just the way it's configured, it's the best one possibly ever for Hallway Con, just because of the way it's set up.
Yeah.
And the attendees.
No, it's great. Yep. That one's great for sure. Right. I don't know if I'm going to make that one. It looks like the CFP is still open for LastCon, at least for 3 more days. And I don't see CFTs. I don't know if that's necessarily been posted or if they've what's going on there. That during that same week here in Utah, we've got SaintCon, right? And I know that one is filling up, right? They started releasing tickets for it. That one's pretty huge, though, all things considered, right?
When is it?
It's that same week, the October 25th through 28th.
Oh.
But it's a pretty good, it's a wider security conference. It's not as focused as LastCon is. LastCon's definitely application security and product security, whereas SaintCon has more of a network security bent. It started off, I know we get the whole weird Mormon or different Mormon vibes, I should say, it being SaintCon in Utah. But Saint comes from Network Saint, was an old assessment, basically a vulnerability scanning tool, right?
Are we having to explain what Saint is now? Is that where we're at?
That is where we're at. Yes. I don't think many people, if you've come up in the last 10 years, Network Saint was not really a tool that you would be familiar with or you would use, right?
I guess that's true.
I know we did early on in our careers. That was one of the kind of standbys, similar, you could probably, drop Nessus in there as well. I guess Nessus is now But some of those other open source free tools that have kind of gone by the wayside, or some people still use them, but I don't think a lot of people use Saint or are familiar with Saint anymore.
To be fair, I did not know that was why the conference was called that.
That was like one of the developers was here, and then they thought it was funny because, again, it's Utah, so the whole like Latter-day Saint, like Mormon connection, whatever you want to call it there.
I never made that connection, to be fair.
Oh, you didn't?
Yeah, that's how open-minded I am. So, humble brag.
Humble brag there, right?
No, I don't. I really actually never. It's because I'm dumb. No, I hadn't thought about that. Interesting.
No.
Well, I keep saying I need to make it out there for one of those. Maybe I actually will. I don't think I'm going to do LastCon just because it's not for any specific reason other than just I don't know. Like, I'm kind of looking for something different. Maybe more wide ranging, I think, is probably the reason.
Yeah. Well, on this one, I mean, if people are interested and are going to be there, I know a lot of the listeners around here that I know in the local OWASP will be there for sure. OWASP, our little Wasatch AppSec group is sponsoring a table, or we'll be at a table there to talk, application security. There's not as many developers that get there, but there is a lot of really cool like IoT stuff and electronics. Snowfensive is always there. They're here in the Valley as well. Like, it's a good conference, and there's a lot to do. I mean, it feels a lot more kind of like the DEF CON-ish crowd, a lot of villages and other things going on than just application security. So I mean, it may be interesting for us to run a workshop and just do a, spot the bug, or bring your code base and let's do secure code review or something like that. But we'll talk about it and take it offline. If people are interested in that, then, we could definitely figure something out, I think. So
yeah, for sure.
Outside of that, right? I'm trying to think what else is going on. Those have kind of been the two. We did apply for trainings at DeepSec. We've got our fingers crossed that gets picked up.
I know we're thinking about maybe getting something set up in Germany. Or that relative area, just as like a not attached to a conference type training.
Yep.
Trying to figure out interest and venue and timelines and all that. But maybe just giving it training that's just, secure code review stuff. And in that case, I think, we could even do a 3-day for like the 3 days, the best. Like, let's be honest. That was the best in Amsterdam, the 3-day format. I loved it. So.
Yeah. It wasn't quite as compressed, right? That's the nice thing about it.
Yeah.
And I think we could do quite a bit, right? Like, that was one of the feedback, or some of the feedback, I should say, that we got about the course is that, like, as we're going through it, we're trying to compress so much information into, a day and a little bit, right? From a, overview first perspective, that the exercises we could definitely give more time on, because I mean, looking at code, I know a lot of the listeners have looked at code before, but looking at code is hard, right? Gaining context, figuring out what's going on. And especially when we're like, oh, you've got 5 minutes to figure out what authorization looks like, even in like a pre-built, purposeful application that's built for that, it can still be a difficult prospect to, looking stuff up online and everything else. So, I mean, a 3-day format would be good there. I know we've had some listeners or some people in the Slack channel that are in like Southern Germany, and if there's more interest there, if we can get 10 people that would that are interested in the course, I think we go for it and we figure it out, right? So if you are interested there, reach out, right? Like, if you're in Europe and you would like to do this and make it a little bit more accessible to you, that's on our radar. I think that's everything off the top of my head right now. I should have a list, right? We do checklists for everything else, but we wing it when we're on the podcast because that's how we roll. You want to dive into any of these articles, right? Like, become AppSec nihilists again for a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know which one. I was thinking, like, I guess we could. Do we want to go into the crypto wallet space stuff first, or?
Sure.
No.
Sure.
Okay. Oh well, I'm actually now I'm trying to find the link. So let me pull this up here. All right, got it.
Yeah, it's on. You find it.
So I forget I'm not sure if this might have been something I caught in Clint's newsletter. And if it was, I'm just going to say it was so that Clint
It
gets
was. Yep.
credit. Okay.
If you are
just 'cause I thought
not
it was pretty
subscribed,
interesting.
if you are not subscribed to TLDRSec and you're listening to the podcast, go sign up for TLDRSec. Clint's amazing. He's been on the podcast before. He works for R2C Dev, right? The SemGrep folks, but he puts out a weekly newsletter that's amazing. So does a lot of research. Anyway, yeah. So what is this one, Ken? 2 crypto wallets, exploits explained. What you got?
Yes,
there?
sorry, I just pasting it into the different channels, Slack and YouTube. So there's 2 major exploits that they kind of talk about with. I'm just going to at a high level kind of explain it. So they means there is a like next, almost like a B-sides next to RSA in San Francisco. There is this unciphered, cryptocurrency asset recovery company, and they unveiled at Off the Chain, which is that conference I was talking about that runs alongside RSA in San Francisco. It's a Web3 security conference. And if I got that wrong, someone correct me, but that's my understanding. It's kind of like running at the same time as RSA. Anyways, all right. So Unciphered, a cryptocurrency asset recovery company. They gave 3 novel exploits impacting crypto wallets, right? So Electra and Bitcoin wallet, Trezor One, is it Trezor? Trezor One, and EthereumWallet.com, right? So the Trezor One exploit, that one was more of like sort of a brute forcing of the wallet. So there's a 9-digit pin that essentially is used to actually secure the wallet, and they used 9 GPUs as well as some proprietary code, and all of the like more in-depth technical details, if you're curious of really diving down in, it's all linked from that original Medium article. But yeah, that's basically what they did. They clustered together 9 GPUs. They ran their proprietary brute forcing code, and they exhausted the 9-digit pin combinations and were able to very efficiently and practically exploit those wallets. So that's the first one. Before I go into the next one,
I want to talk to this a little bit, right? In general, right, I do get some questions about like why we spend so much time in Web3, right? And part of the reasons is that like these kind of novel attacks and attack surfaces that pop up in Web3, they exist. I mean, it's all some level of application security, right? Like the way that we're handling code and running code. And it's very interesting because a lot of this is public, right? So we have smart contracts. We've got these wallets that are public, how they do transfers, how they do access. And a lot of this has been hidden behind the scenes in kind of traditional AppSec. So, how people are doing random number generation, like in this case, like creating these pins in a traditional application is probably running on a server somewhere. We don't necessarily have access to the code, but in the Web3 space, we do. And so we see these sorts of novel attacks, like bad randomness. I think if you look at not so smart crypto, or a couple of the other projects that are out there, is kind of one of the number one things that crypto companies do wrong, or crypto developers, Web3 developers do wrong, because they are basing it off of, hey, typically we have this layer of, it's a layer of security because no one can actually see the code and how the randomness is being generated. But when you do have that access, and you have access to 50 GPUs that can generate random numbers very quickly, and you can replay that, you can replay that algorithm over and over. All of a sudden, these crypto attacks become not crypto, but cryptographic attacks become realistic, and it can actually be run, right? So I can take over wallets. I can do other things. I can generate random numbers in the same way that a smart contract does. If it's using, salts and everything that's defined in the smart contract, it's very easy to replicate that locally and take advantage of it because you can start to predict what's actually going to happen. So bad randomness is just huge in the space. So I'm going off on a tangent, Ken, but I've been thinking a lot about that. Why is Web3 so interesting to you and I? And it's because it is novel, it is new, and the attack surface is just, I mean, it's massive and there's billions of dollars behind it, but it's also, we can see what's going on. So we see a lot more of these sorts of reports that we probably wouldn't have seen in the traditional AppSec or traditional web space.
Yeah, and I mean, Web3 is supposed to be decentralized. We're just not there yet. The only part that's really decentralized is the blockchain itself, right? That's the only thing that's semi decentralized. And at that point, it's still centralized because you're still relying on server and clients to do validations against that chain and to, do all of the asset and pool kind of like logic. And so at the end of the day, all of this infrastructure, all of this stuff that's doing stuff that is not yet decentralized is very much centralized and relying upon mostly code, right? And that's what we live in. That's what we do. We look at code for vulnerability. So that's why it's interesting. I didn't know anybody had asked you like, hey, why are you guys talking about Web3 so much? But that is why we're talking about it. It's the next thing, and it's interesting, and it's emergent. And yeah. Hey, so I did want to mention though, real quick, before we move on, that Trezor, if I'm even saying that right, probably I'm saying that wrong. I feel like an a-hole. Anyways, Trezor, or however you say it, they did say that using a passphrase in addition to the PIN will fully mitigate the attack. And they did the whole like same thing every vendor does. Like, we work with well-intentioned researchers and all of that stuff, and that's great and that's fine and wonderful and all that. I don't think that it's necessarily they're sitting here saying like your wallet's completely flawed. I think they're just saying like we found a pretty well, I would say more than pretty quick. I mean, with a 9-digit PIN, they can crack that in 15 minutes is the claim. And then within 12 minutes, or excuse me, for a 12-digit PIN, they can do that within about a week. And that's pretty quick. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty quick, but that's assuming you don't use a passphrase, right? So there are like ifs, ands, and buts, and nuts and candy and all that stuff to this one. So it's not super straightforward and simple, but yeah, buzzwords. Well, Web3. Sorry, I'm reading something someone wrote. Buzzwords. I think most of the world doesn't understand it, which makes it exciting for security folks because it's the Wild West all over. Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly. You hear there are buzzwords. There's a lot of like hype around Web3. Some of it's, undue, some of it's due. I mean, some of it's really cool. I think at the end of the day, yeah, like it's going to be very much like when you say Wild West, I think of IoT. IoT was very much, and it still is very much the Wild West. It's not that it's a new thing. It's using like Telnet and like FTP or SFTP if you're lucky. All the same stuff we've seen all along. All of the same very simple operating system and protocols being used. It's nothing new, right? But the use of those tools, the use of the way that it's all kind of glued together, and the business purpose of those tools are what for sure makes it interesting. And yeah, I think it is the Wild West, especially when you talk about all of the different, blockchains and all the different exchanges and all the different providers. It's like, yeah, and all of the different also theorized ways that that this technology is going to be used in the future too. And yeah, I think all of that comes together to make it super fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it does feel a lot. I remember early days when you and I were starting to work together and we got pushed into the mobile space, right? Like apps were just popping up, right? Like all the app stores weren't quite solidified yet. And everybody's jumping to those different, on those different bandwagons from a mobile perspective. The difference that I see now is the amount of money that is associated with it, right? Like, cracking a wallet, right? Like targeting someone to take over an app on a mobile phone is one thing, but if they have a wallet that's on that mobile phone or the mobile phone has access to, that has millions of dollars associated with it, that target just went way up from an attacker's perspective, right? Like, I'm going to spend months and months looking into it, if the payout is there, which is something that we didn't necessarily see initially in that mobile space or even the IoT space. Yes, there's a lot of there's economies of scale with the IoT. There's like the IoT worms that go around and, they can do X, Y, and Z, but there's no direct translation in either of those spaces to money, right? Whereas Web3 there is direct translation to funds. Like when you start talking about the exchanges, you start talking about liquidity pools,
Liquidity
right?
pools. Yeah.
And so it's fascinating how quick the attackers jump on that, right? Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, we're kind of going off on a tangent, but that's why, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the tangents are where we live, though.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. So that was the first one, right? That first exploit was using those GPUs to crack the pin because you could see how it was being generated. What were the other ones? The other ones were pretty interesting too.
Yeah, the Electrum RC. So that one, again, there's further. So they linked to a recording of the exploit demo, which has again more technical details. What I think is interesting is that it comes back to the same thing that so many vulnerabilities. This is just the basic underlying gist is that they took a QR code and that's used as input, and there's no validation and normalization of that data whatsoever. It's just here's input, read it, do something with it, and that leads to remote code execution in this case. I will say I think it was limited to Windows, to the Electrum wallet running on Windows 10 systems. So I do believe that was sort of the one limitation, or not that it's a huge limitation, but it is, let's see the wallet's GitHub repositories. There's 2,700 forks of that Electrum source code, which compounds the problem, right? So any fix of that QR code function or functionality that reads in that content, any fixes there now has to be applied to 2,700 forks. If they're, let's be honest, there's probably a lot of forks there where it's people experimenting, messing around for sure, right? But there's for sure also like some legit, like people are using this in production forks. There has to be, right? So now you have to go back and apply that to those providers. So they're calling it similar to like a Log4j level vulnerability.
Yeah.
Is it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's quite to that level there, but I think that's debatable for sure, but it's definitely interesting. Now my question is, do you know, because I'm not as savvy about all the wallets and all of that's out there. Are you familiar at all with the Electrum wallet at all?
I have not used the Electrum one. I know it's used by the Bitcoin community more, right? Because it has been around for a long time. But it's not one that I'm as familiar with, right? The interesting thing here is it is definitely pulling that in from, and this is, I'm jumping down the rabbit hole. I'm starting to look at code now too, because it's, Electrum is open source, right? And part of it is abstract QR code results.
I like this comment too. Cracking a wallet does pose what I believe is low risk, high reward for threat actors. Compromising a wallet gets very low media coverage. And no, that's good. Yeah, definitely a good point for sure. It is low risk and it is high reward. If you can get access to those wallets for sure. It depends on what's in them, right? That could be a pretty amazing payday.
Yeah. Well, and that was the point that I was trying to drive at there, is that the amount of money that's associated with these Web3 properties means that an attacker is going to spend months looking at the different wallets in this case to see if there's a flaw there that they can exploit. Whereas in the traditional space, yeah, there's a bank or whatever that's online, they're online banking, but the surface is a lot smaller, right? There's not as much for you to actually take advantage of. And then the decentralized nature of the blockchain also means if you can find an exploit, all of a sudden you can transfer that to another wallet, you can move it some other place, and it, is quote unquote untraceable, as opposed to the traditional finance system. So high reward. You're absolutely right there. Yeah, the interesting thing on that Electrum, right, as I'm digging into the code, Ken, not to, to swing us back to that, is that the QR code reader, it is definitely a library that they're importing, right? It looks like it's ZBar, and this is always like you and I have talked about this a lot, and I know in the Node space they talk about it quite a bit. That 90+% of your application is actually not custom. It's mostly the libraries that you pull in.
Yeah.
And so, having a flaw in one of those libraries or not implementing it quite properly can lead to something like this Electrum takeover, right? So RCE based on, looks like it's ZBar, right? Yeah, ZBar QR code reader, right? I'm going to look that up. ZBar QR code, Python, C++. Yep. Open source software utility built, looks like 2011. ZBar from GitHub, open source software, right? Like, and this is where people start to target those packages and what your application depends upon, right? It's open source software. We can see a list of what the requirements are. So let's go look at the QR code because that's accepting user input. And if the restrictions on that QR code or it's processing, it looks like it was processing like SMB strings or something like that, which was leading to the exploit.
Yeah, the whole scenario, and I apologize if I'm restating anything because I did accidentally drop off there for a second, Seth, because I have a trackpad and my arm brushed against it as I was just moving, and it just did a back on the StreamYard site. Anyways, whatever. It says basically what they think is the chain. So this is the Berlin-based founder of Electrum Technologies, who's kind of giving the synopsis here. Basically, a SMB server message block network configuration is needed. The attacker and the victim have to be on the same network. The attacker needs to send a payment request that's then read in via QR to the victim. And then the victim finally has to have a weak Windows 10 password. And then so it's a few things. So when you I guess what I'm saying, that all of that to say, I don't think it's nearly the log4j level, if that's all true, which it sounds like given some of the details we see here, it's probably true. I can't say that that's at all similar to a log4j. This is not going to send most engineering teams into a panic, right? Meaning most is in any demographic, which is exactly what happened with log4j. Yeah, this is specific to some folks who are using the technology. And again, even in that subset, you have even a smaller group of people that are specifically under these conditions. So I don't know. Yeah, it's feasible, but is it, log4j level? No, absolutely not. I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, it's a similar, right, RCE style attack, right? You're taking user input, you're doing something with it. So there are parallels. I can see where they draw it. It's really fun to say, oh, it's the next log4j because, right, that'll get you at least some views or whatever else. So yeah. But both of those are interesting, right? Again, right, it's library, it's dependencies, how you interact with those dependencies. Do you understand the risks that are going on there? Right, digging into that code is super interesting. I'm wondering if the next time we do an After Dark episode, if we pull one of those open source, not necessarily the libraries, but we could pull an open source wallet and take a look at it, like a Web3 property as opposed to kind of the traditional web app. It might be interesting to show people how we break that down as opposed to something that is more of a traditional API or whatever else.
Yeah, right. We all know you're just trying to break bad. That's why you like Web3. That's why you want to look at
exactly. Yes.
You just want to go full black hat mode and make all the monies. No, yeah.
When we start doing absolute AppSec from our multi-million-dollar yacht, undisclosed location in the middle of the Pacific somewhere,
international waters. Don't say the Pacific. You're ruining it.
The Indian Ocean. There you go.
No, a non-specific is what he said. Ocean
portion of the I'm just throwing people off the scent, Ken. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, could be the Atlantic, could be the Mediterranean. Nobody knows. You have no idea.
No one knows. No one knows. We're bouncing off so many VPNs. Yeah.
Keep them guessing, man. Keep guessing. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, okay. So those were fun, man. We start digging in. I don't know, like the parallels. Part of the reason, again, I find this so fascinating is the parallels that we see, right? Like dependencies, brute forcing, right? Like the attacks haven't changed. It's just it's a new space that we're playing in, which is amazing, right? It's fascinating. Okay. So do you want to talk about Amazon?
I want to talk about this.
Okay. All right. Well, we won't jump into smart contract best practices then. I think the Amazon discussion will be a little bit more fun.
I don't know. It depends. I mean, I'm actually cool with whatever you want. I was just gonna I just happened to see this, and we don't even have to spend that much time talking about it. It's like, I don't know, man. I'm constantly paranoid about the larger tech companies, the ones that sort of dominate the space, the ones that you have listening devices inside your house and video surveillance and all that stuff. Yeah, of course I'm paranoid. We work in security. That's like literally our underlying fundamental behavior is to be paranoid. It should be. Anyways,
yes.
Having said all that, let me post this actual article so people can stop and me rant like a.
So Ken says that, and then we're asking people to send us their physical address, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, send us a PO box if it makes you feel better. Yeah. So here's what happened. It in a letter, it was exposed in a letter to some Democrat representative. I forget his name, Markey or something like that. Anyways, doesn't matter. Basically, Amazon had given, I think it was 11 or 12 times. Let me get that article up on my machine too, so I can look at it. 11 or 12 times they had and I will give this to Amazon. They said that they, had gone through and done this. So they had given surveillance over to the police. That's what I'm trying to say. They had given surveillance of Ring cameras to the police without the knowledge and consent of the people that installed and purchased and operate the Ring, the Ring doorbells, right? They did this without anyone being involved. And so meaning anybody who had actually purchased the Ring or, authorized it and installed it and all that stuff, right? So they said that they did this with a good faith sort of risk approach to it. So in the cases they felt that it was okay, and they did this. Oh, I'm sorry, my dog is just jumping up on me. It's insanity. Anyway, so they did this with a good faith approach to determining the risk of exposing this content. There were no warrants. There was nothing to that effect. It was just literally the police asking Amazon, "Can we get access to this Ring door camera footage?" And Amazon did their whatever due diligence they did inside. I can't speak to that. And they allowed for that footage to be shared. So sorry, I'm also putting a watch on my son so he can go ride his bike. I'm a little distracted. Anyways, all right. So getting down into it, I'll talk kind of at first about what bothers me the most about this. First of all, I think the biggest fear that I would personally have is that the devices that you purchase from these companies then become part of a mass surveillance network that authorities have the ability to access. at any time, and that these private companies are now cooperating with governments without any sort of regulation. And I am sure that they're now, having said that, I'm sure, and I haven't like dug down into this yet, there's got to be, I'm guessing, some end user agreement, something, one of those 500-page, things you just agree to, right? That everybody does, we all do. That probably gives some latitude, affords them some latitude, to do these kinds of things. Having said that, that's again, very, very, that's entering a space that makes me incredibly nervous, right? It's, I think, probably been the fear of most people that have been concerned about like having Echo shows and Dots and Google Home devices and all that stuff in your house, is like that ever being without your consent shared with an authority. I'm sure that all of this, it's not, it's about that thing. Like when you look at case law, it's not about the individual instances. It was probably for the best, with good intentions. It's not about that. It's about the long term, right? It's about the 10, 20-year outlook. Where does that lead to? What ramifications come of it? And yeah, it makes me incredibly nervous. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Seth.
Yeah, I'm with you on this, right? Like it's this slippery slope. And like, I know, like personally, I'm guilty of this, right? Like the convenience and the privacy that you give up when you like trust these large companies to have access to audio, video feeds, and just so you can, have Siri or whatever else actually like set a timer for you and other things like that, right? Like the amount of data that gets sent back is overly concerning. And yes, there's, that we have a tendency to trust those companies, but a lot of the long-term effects are exactly what I have concerns with, right? Like, because once you give them that access and you become comfortable with it, they always seem to push that envelope further, right? Oh, well, if you're okay with us, like just giving this, without your consent at any time, why don't I just do a direct feed to, and whether it's law enforcement or a private security company or whatever, right? Like all of a sudden they become a security company and they're monitoring for people, for places. I mean, they've already built in AI to a lot of these products to search and to recognize people, to recognize delivery drivers, right? Like all these other things. And we're getting into that kind of surveillance state. But it's this weird, like siloed surveillance state, right? Like there's like the Ring surveillance state, and there's probably like, we saw the problems with the Wise cameras recently as well, right? But sorry, all of these different. Yep, somebody's outside. Somebody's come to say hi.
It's Max. He's out there riding a bike, and she sees him, and she's like, "Yeah." Anyway, sorry.
My turn. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, like at some point, there's going to be a company that starts to join these different surveillance networks together. And what does that actually become? And it's especially concerning when we start talking about right to privacy as well, right? Like, is that a right that you have? Are you giving that up within your own home, right? Because you are recording things, or just around your home because that's a public space, right? Like, and I don't know. I mean, I know there's ways to do that and to do notifications and to do it properly. So like, what are the ramifications going to be for Amazon and Ring in this case? That's my question. What is the response to this? Because realistically, there's probably no real punishment, I should say. Yeah,
dude, the articles to find out about this were so buried. Like I didn't even, I mean, yeah, you can Google directly for it and get articles, but I'm saying like in terms of it being just like put out there for the general consumption, like I came across this in a very like accidental way, right? Like because like I pilfer through things to try and find like interesting content, right? This wasn't something that was like the news just put at the top of their headlines. Like, of course it's not, right? Like what would the financial interest of media companies be in anyway. So having said that, there's probably no backlash whatsoever. Although, it's a weird one too, because it's like, okay, the law does authorize in extreme cases, right? In extreme cases where we're talking like kidnappings and things like that, murder, for those to be for those to be handed over to law enforcement. But this was done without a warrant. This was done without any sort of due diligence, any kind of like basically we're reliant on the oversight of some group within Amazon that decided this was okay. We weren't relying upon a publicly elected and held, set of officials reviewing the case to say this is something that like meets the bar. And I guess I'm just it's up to like us to just be like, oh yeah, I think like probably they got a due diligence group. It's probably fine. And again, like I understand that say if it was my child, for instance, and God forbid, right? Is my child, something happens, and like yeah, I would want that surveillance footage shared with the authorities as well. But I would need to ask the owners, right? Like that's the thing. I would still. And I would think, most people would be okay to consent in extreme situations as well, too, right? And maybe not, but that's a choice. That's a choice someone gets to make. It's all complicated and it's all difficult, but it's a really weird thing to just say, like, I don't know. So does that change your thoughts any at all on like the use for you, anyways, of the security or convenience devices these companies offer?
Not necessarily, right? Like I still have my concerns because internally these large companies have shown that the standards that they apply are just so wildly different based on situations and based on the people that are sitting on those boards, right? I mean, I posted that statement into both the chats from the article, right? From their like the company response to it, which is basically, yeah, Ring faithfully applies that legal standard, right? And I'm like, okay, right. That means that there's lawyers that are involved, and there's probably like in most cases this was probably warranted, but the fact that it's almost like whistleblower-ish makes me question what those standards are. And we already have those problems with the social media companies and how they apply their standards on what's community safe or
what follows community guidelines or safe,
and
safety.
what doesn't, right? Like, and then this gets weird too because it's not just in the US, right? We start talking about in the EU, you start talking about Asian countries and where that data is hosted or where it goes to, and like it becomes messy so quickly, right? That was the other thing, right? The amount of data that TikTok has like shipped off, right? Like user data as well. There have been articles recently about that, and it's just as concerning because it's going to places that you don't necessarily intend or you don't even know about as a user of those services. So,
yeah, I mean, you don't know, right? Like you just and that's the thing. I ask you because even for you, I doubt it makes any difference. It's and I mean, like same. Not like I'm not unplugging my Google Mesh network. I'm not getting rid of it for that. I have disabled certain features within it for sure, just because like, yeah, there's that part of me that it's just like, but then again, I'm disabling things in a product. I don't update, I mean, not that I didn't write the software for it is what I mean,
Yep. Yeah, and we didn't audit the software for it. You don't know what it's doing. I mean, there's people out there on some of the social media channels. There's a couple of security guys that'll like analyze the traffic, right, of what's going on from a lot of these IoT devices and other things to see just where it's going, what back end clouds they're using. If it's using a lot of tracking devices, if it's sending data off in certain situations or constantly communicating, right? Like there's concerning features about each of those. And it's hard to get at that data if you're not a security professional. And it's hard to push my threat model as a security professional to average consumers, right? They have a healthy level of skepticism, right? But the convenience features often outweigh that skepticism, right? And if anything, all the companies use those convenience features to justify exactly what they want to do, right? Because they want to sell those products, they want that data, and that data is a gold mine for advertisers, right? Like, I just don't see regulation coming to that. And I don't see any sort of consequences for doing this sort of thing. And so it becomes more of a, okay, like we're becoming tinfoil hat people, and, you know, I'm going to wrap my house in a Faraday cage, and right, like ingress points, yeah, I don't know. It's scary, but it's also like, right, this is what we were promised. And when companies do things like this is what they've always said they're going to do, right? If you read the legalese, yeah. And so I just, like, they said they were going to do this. We shouldn't be shocked when they do it. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, I like that too. Sorry, I'm also reading. There's like also really good comments. So I'm listening to you. I'm also reading these really good comments that are coming out as a part of this discussion. Like, one thing I think is interesting here is Daniel had mentioned forcing people in the name of safety to serve targeted ads. And to the point there, which is you don't have a choice, and you don't have a choice. Like you can leave the platform, but if that's where everybody's at, that's like saying, like, well, you can just not use mobile phones anymore if you don't like the fact that we're listening to all your calls. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, that's absolutely batshit crazy, right? So anyways, reading this, going a little bit further, there was a tweet about age-appropriate healthcare that also got age-gated, as it was put here. So age-restricted adult content. This content might not be appropriate for everyone. To view this media, you'll need to add your birthday to your profile. Twitter also uses your age to show more relevant content, including ads, as explained in our privacy policy. Yeah, not great. And I also like this other comment here about there should be more ethics-focused discussions in security modeling, like threat modeling, but kind of like wider sort of discussion around ethics. And I totally agree. In fact, this is actually something I was talking about to John with this morning, was like, whenever we do these things where we have like a long term, where we're going to build a product and it's going to take, I don't know, long tail, like 12 months or more to like from the inception to like production, right? When it's going to be a big one, it's going to be like almost like a service level fundamental. In those cases, we tend to embed. So we'll have like somebody from one of our teams, from the product security team, kind of embed, and then they'll pull in resources as needed. But one of the first things we do is we create this concept of security principles. We call them security principles, but they actually are a little bit more than that. And this is where we draw the lines in the sand on our, not just the security, but like also the sort of like ethical and product business, sort of like what's reasonable for us to secure and for users to what can we expect users will expect of us, what should customers be able to expect of us, and then what things should we not be concerned about, and does that all line up with, and mind you, that's just the security aspect of it. There's all these other factors that go into developing a product, and I can tell you, like, ethics is always a part of those conversations, right? But I think I guess what I'm trying to say is, to the point of, should security factor it in? Oh yeah, I am 100% a believer that security has to think about the ethics of things, right? Like there's a bit of an obligation there, I think.
Yeah, and we all do, right, at some level, right? Whatever we're looking at, but it does seem like the second that there's a down corridor or there's like money problems, that ethics, like that ethical line, gets crossed pretty quickly, or it gets shoved to the side in the search of greater profits, in the search of new features or other things, right? So like, it's hard to actually see. So like, one of the things that I always come back to, or one of the people actually who was on one of the midsummer or midwinter night con, whatever it was, Cory Doctorow has really, really good stuff on privacy and watching. I recently read this article just popped up a couple of days ago, right? On, DRM in general, right? And how, like, any system, any IoT system, anything that's in your realm, or in your space that runs code, can actually run any code that you want it to run. but companies have restricted it based on what they think is appropriate and what they want you to be able to do. But his views on kind of privacy and like just in general ethics of these large media companies is very interesting to jump into, right? Because he does align. He's got a lot of the same fears and realistic expectations of what's going on and how it's, how we're driving toward almost a surveillance state because of the convenience features that we run into. So, I mean, I don't necessarily have an answer for it outside of, if you are involved, like Ken was saying, if you are involved with new product development, new application, new feature development, let's make sure and be transparent about it. Let's make sure and give people the option to opt out, and also like be realistic about what you should be doing. And again, it always kind of goes back to, what do I expect to see in the code that I release? And I expect some of that ethical, like high standards. I expect those protections to be there. And if all companies don't do that, or all people don't do that, we should at least recognize it, that they haven't released that sort of information, right? Or they haven't released that sort of guideline. I don't know if there's anything else that you can do there or say to it, right?
No, and actually, I was kind of trying to peruse some of the article as you're summarizing and then giving your thoughts, and it's a long one, so I'm definitely gonna have to digest that one later.
That's for future reference, because I just pulled that out because it was relevant to what we were talking about, and I really like Cory Doctorow. I followed him for years, so yeah.
I do want to go back to the comment here, and it's a valid question. The question is, but whose ethics, right? As a publicly listed company, you're legally obligated to push profits. So would it be ethically challenging if you don't maximize profits? So I think there's a lot to unpack there, right? There really is. Like we could probably, we don't have the time to go through all of it. Having said that, I think there's a couple points to that I want to extrapolate. So one thing, first and foremost, is you as a security person are there to protect your company's assets, right? So for me, it's pretty easy, the question of ethics, because I know that for our customers, the people who are paying money, they explicitly don't want their data shared. They want that data to be private. I know that for a fact. That is the whole concept behind all of the cap style protections we offer, all of the organization settings you can turn on, and all the switches you can flip, and all of the work that we do. And obviously, honestly, my life work my life in a week to week is all of that, right? It's all about that. It's about keeping your data safe, right? So I think the question is not necessarily, is it the profit aspect? Or are there other factors? We want to make profit. So that is one thing that we are ethically obligated to do. But we also want to protect our users' content and provide them a safe place to share and store and interact with the community, right? That's another thing that we can also focus on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, it's not an easy answer. It's certainly not an easy question, but there's still, if we look at what the company's goals are, it's not just money. It's also, to accomplish that, there are other things that they have to prioritize. Having said that, while I am no anti-capitalism person, I'll just be honest. That's, I will say there is a time though that you've got to prioritize. You've got to prioritize some things above money. That's just the reality. So, but yeah, what are your thoughts there? Because that is one we could really, I feel like that could be hours of a philosophical conversation. So
it is a philosophical conversation, because, when it comes down to whose ethics, right? Like where the company is located, runs, does a lot to determine what those ethics actually are, right? Like ethics for companies and what's driven in the compliance legal environment in the United States is much different than what is driven in the EU, and the level of expectations around privacy and other things like that. And then it's different if you go into Africa or you go into Asia or like around the world. So you've got that layer that goes into it. That's kind of like the macro ethics, right? And and then you get into like the like micro ethics of the company founders, statements. Like, I mean, from a Google perspective, their whole "don't be evil" motto, right? Like that sort of thing is going to start to play into what are the ethics. You have different people that join up. You probably, like, some organizations have, ethics committees, privacy committees, and that's all going to feed into it. But it's all based on the experience and the expectations of the people that are on those committees. And again, they're not like a duly like elected official that necessarily represents the user base. It's whoever the company wants to hire or wants to like be on that board. And so it's going to reflect the ethics, the macroeconomics or the macro ethics that went into it, right? Like and I'm trying to equate this to economics at some level, because it does feed into that as well, right? A public versus a private company is going to have a different set of ethics associated with it because of the drivers, because of what you're calling out there. And like, I just don't think we're going to solve it, right? But yes, profits will always overrule that discussion, right? Like, yeah, I don't know, right? Like, because how many companies have you run into that have like some sort of an ethical statement from a public perspective, right?
Well, at least the one I work for. But yeah, I mean, in terms of well, and then it's also one thing, like you're asking the question of who's stating it. Like there's the other question of who's actually following through on their statement. It's one thing to say it, it's another to actually do it, right? But I think like zooming out, right, and still looking at ethics, like at the end of the day, looking at the long term of this, does it feel right for your government to, without your consent, have access to the content of things you purchase to make your life easier, or maybe to, have some level of security to, with cameras and whatnot, or even just, hey, maybe I don't feel safe answering the door without first knowing who's at the door. That's a reasonable thing, right? Like that's not. Mm-hmm. But then did you think that it was going to be okay to like, and maybe if you pulled every single person whose Ring camera was, that content was given off to the government, maybe they're totally fine with it. Doesn't matter. The long term of this, the long-term ramifications are an ethical question, right? Nonetheless. And that question is it okay for the government and private companies to have that kind of relationship and use the things you're purchasing and operating against your consent, or without even your consent, without even asking? Is it okay for them to share that content? And that has wide-reaching long-term ramifications if unchecked.
Yeah, and I think that's what it goes back to, the unchecked, right? Who is it that's making these decisions? Is it people that we've, we kind of vote with our wallets in this case, right? Based on the convenience features. There's so many people that use those Ring cameras that, of course, there's going to be situations like these that pop up, but we voted with our wallets that like that is the price point where we are willing to install this and put it on our front door. And then they have access to that so that it can provide, a video of who's out there, but also like this, the convenience features again, that we've bought into that, even though we probably haven't looked at those terms of service for that heavily. That is the state that we live in right now. And yeah, like walking up to a door, like you're basically, if there's a Ring doorbell cam there, you're giving consent for your image to go off to Amazon, right? Doesn't matter if you've purchased a product, it's other people in those public spaces that are pushing that, that are being fingerprinted or face printed in that case. I don't know, man. Like if you look up something like business ethics compliance, there's not really like, there's compliance reports that are out there. I don't know if there's really like an ethical like compliance report that a business can put out, basically comparing, like, I'm thinking something like, I mean, we're way off, whatever, right, today, but you think of like SOC 2 compliance, SOC 2 type 2 for IT compliance. Is there a standard that's out there for, hey, you're following your ethical statement as a public company that, you won't do X, Y, and Z with this data. It only gets sent. It doesn't get sent to third parties, like all that sort of, all those sorts of statements that are out there. Are they actually being applied properly? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would think that Amazon has something along those lines that they could provide. But
yeah, well, in areas, yes, in certain areas. In this area, I'm not certain. I don't think they'd want to, right? So like the ethics behind, hiring and sustainable this, that, and the other, all that stuff's usually, public. But in terms of, things like we're sharing your content with, law enforcement. Yeah, it's probably. And honestly, like the other thing too to factor in is these companies are just only gaining ground and getting bigger, right? Like Apple, and I think both Apple and Amazon announced their acquisitions of like multi-billion-dollar healthcare companies to expand into healthcare. Like, you know what I mean? Like this is not a problem that's going away. These are companies that are only getting more powerful. And that's not to say I'm saying don't use Amazon, don't use Apple. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's some questions I have, and I think all of us should have. So anyways, cool, man.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, you just keep poking the bear over there. I love it. He asks, what if the right ethics in that locale to do is share everything with the government, right? Like, because that's how they will keep us safe from the bad boogeyman, right? Like, he's absolutely right. Like that's that kind of slippery slope that we get onto is, hey, right? Like when we start to share with the government without any sort of oversight, any sort of checks and balances, eventually it gets to the point that the government gets all the data and then decides what to do with it. And when that's the case, right, are we losing privacy? Are we giving up rights because of that? All because we just purchased a Ring device or whatever else it is, and didn't realize what those ramifications are or were at the time. And I don't have a good answer for any of this, right? Like it's an interesting thought experiment, I guess, that we're going down as far as like what are the ethical standards of giving data to the government without notifying users. Because that's the minimum, or that's where this conversation started.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair point. Like there are definitely places I could see, where it's like, it becomes more of like, well, why wouldn't you want to share that data with the government? And I think
you only share that. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, I just think that's probably like pretty heavily You're right. I think it's an interesting question because it's very culturally nuanced, because each culture will look at it differently. We are in the US, obviously freedom first and all that, right? So I am more biased to be like, no, share nothing with the government, just
the
don't do it.
Minimum. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And to like have a natural distrust of our government. I think that yes, is a healthy thing. And I think that is very, to your point, very culturally specific to certain places, and more so than others, for sure. There are definitely smaller, or not even, it has nothing to do with that, but I can think of a few places where for sure that's not at all like the biggest concern there, and that it might even be considered silly to be concerned about that. Mm-hmm. Just as that is true for a lot of the things that some countries have rights on. These are rights to own this, rights to use that, rights to do whatever. And then other places that's not okay. It's considered some sort of like, I can't believe it, right? Like, so anyways, my point is that's a great question. Do we trust Apple, Amazon more than the government? That's another great question. I don't think so, because the government's supposed to be for, well, our government's supposed to be for, the U.S. government's supposed to be for the people, by the people, all that stuff, right? Whereas a company is for the shareholders, from the shareholders, for the shareholders, by the shareholders type deal.
So as long as you've got stock in both Amazon and Apple, then sure, why not, right? Like it, because it's
or just become a member of Congress, and you'll have all the insider trading you want. You can have both, best of both. You can influence policy and use it to your financial advantage. So
yeah. I mean, I think what it really comes down to for me personally is the transparency of what they're doing, right? Like, show me what you're doing, give me a track record that I can look at as far as what you do with my data, where it actually goes, and then I can decide. I can make the decision on whether or not I want to use those products and vote with my wallet.
Yep.
Yeah. And why I love threat modeling is because of the synergy with the back in the day philosophy, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, these are great questions. I could this is a fun one. I could sit here for 3 hours and have this conversation. Unfortunately, I can't, and you can't, but I'd love to.
Well, yeah, let's keep it going, because there's a lot of good conversation. And if you want to see the conversation, join us on Slack. Right. There's a bunch of great people in there. It's not just me and Ken, and there's discussions going on all the time that even we're not involved in. So jump in, become a part of the community. And otherwise, thanks for all the interaction today. Send me a DM if you want some swag. And I think that's everything for now, Ken. Unless you have any final thoughts on how to protect yourself and, against disclosure of your data to third parties.
Yeah. So there's two things. Montana and Wyoming, you can move there. You can build a cabin, use no electricity, live off the grid, and I think you'll be fine. Like, honestly, I think you'll be fine. So,
just make sure and do TikToks on a daily basis to tell everyone where you live and what you're doing, so you can keep making some money, right? Like that's
exactly. So you still bring in that so you can buy buy Amazon products.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Sweet, man. All right. Thanks everybody. We will be back next week. And I know we've got some guests that we need to queue up. So watch out for that. We'll post on Twitter as soon as we know who's going to be when, so people can plan out or listen after the fact. So, but we'll chat with everyone next week or on Slack. Ciao. Thanks, everybody.